I'm not sure there needs to be much further debate about whether or not it was a U-turn. There has been some, because you could argue it's not a full U-turn. Is that helpful to argue it's not a full U-turn? What should we be looking at U-turning?
For my money, it was your classic 100% smell the burning rubber screeching U-turn.
Right. OK. So that's not really much debate there.
Not really.
No.
I mean, and we've seen lots of U-turns before also when they say, but we'll have to tell you what else we're going to do instead a bit later on. But yeah, classic U-turn.
And is it on a par with anything else they've done? Have they U-turned on anything
No,
else?
not in this way. No. Absolutely not. However, I would boringly say something that I've said and written many, many, many times. The Westminster view of U-turns, calamity, drama, appalling, is very different often to a normal person's view of a U-turn, which might be, well, actually, if you're doing something that isn't working, changing it might be a good thing.
And for this newscast and for our newscasters, does one U-turn open the floodgates?
Potentially. And it does shake the credibility a little bit of the decision makers at the top of government. But when you still have a majority of a gazillion, this does not open the door to the government necessarily giving way on lots and lots and lots of things.
So if you don't have time, that is our whole Saturday newscast in 90 seconds. But here we go with the rest of it.
Hello, it's Laura in studio.
It's Paddy in the studio.
And before we get going on this U-turn, Matt from Ashford in Kent says, I think we should call it not a full U-turn, but a U-bend. Blimey. Cheeky Matt. Newscasters, we love hearing what's on your mind, so keep them coming.
Daniel Markham is a farmer in Essex who WhatsApped to say now the government has U-turned on the winter fuel payment decision. Do you think there's any chance they may delay or scrap the inheritance tax changes for farmers?
Well, it would be unlikely, but that's not to say it wouldn't happen. And I think that the decision this week does put a little bit of wobble under and a little bit of opportunity for people who've been campaigning against particular things they don't like. And they will be able to use that as part of their arguments, whether it's on the family farm tax, as the Tories have branded it, or whether it's on getting rid of the 2-child benefit cap for some families. It does create a bit of they might listen harder on some things. But I think winter fuel was so huge. We heard again and again and again and again and again and again, didn't we? From MPs, insiders, advisors, pollsters. This was the number one thing that the public was raising to Labour politicians. Privately, it's the number one thing that lots of people in and outside the government in the Labour movement think that they got it wrong. One cabinet minister was saying to me yesterday it was obviously a mistake from the beginning. And I think it had such a kind of it taken on such a sort of poison.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean it applies in the same way.
Because his words were, I want more pensioners to have winter fuel payments.
Yes.
So what we don't know is what will be announced at the spending review. And I spoke to Carl Emerson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies.
Independent number crunchers,
who said, if you want it to happen this winter, you're going to have to really get it ready in this. You can't wait till the autumn. You're going to have to do it in June. If you wait till the autumn, you won't get it done this winter.
That's correct. So there's a question mark still over the timing. There's a question mark over where the threshold will be set for who will now have it coming back into their bank account this winter or maybe next winter. So there are still things to be decided about the nature, in the end, of the U-turn. But when you talk to people in Downing Street about it, they say, look, this was the right thing to do. It was becoming a huge, big political problem. It was the right thing to do in that moment. And now we are nearly a year on. We've been able to think again.
Yeah, economy's improved. There's been 0.5% growth.
Well, it has. But then if you look at the position of the public finances, which we're going to talk a lot about in the coming weeks, because the spending review is coming at us like a train down a track, some of the numbers look worse. So, yeah, the government's saying at the moment, look, the economy looks a bit more peppy. Household savings, for example, are going up. But inflation's just gone back up again. Public finances are still not at all in a healthy position. But it evoked for me, talking to ministers about it this week, you were sort of taken back to that moment, actually, when they moved into number 10. And ministers did, I think, partly performatively, but also genuinely go, oh, my God, we didn't actually realise how bad things were. And they were genuinely nervous about the urgency of the economic problems at that moment. And it's easy to forget that's the context in which they took the decision to take winter fuel allowance away from millions and millions of pensioners. I still am of the view that it was hard to see how that decision got through any sort of political lens, really. You're like, wow, your first decision on its own, dropping from space with no preamble. The first big thing that you want to do is go after pensioners as a Labour government with no preparation. Really? But I think that context, that the context in which they took the decision, I think that's been slightly forgotten this week.
Yeah, because and that was also ahead of the budget, so it was almost the first sort of thing they announced, and they didn't get to the budget. So this spending review takes on this massive role, doesn't it? And I think Faisal Islam said on Friday's newscast, it's very fiscal and it's very much like an event, but we can't call it a fiscal event.
So the technical thing is that a fiscal event is when a government puts up taxes or cuts taxes. This is not going to be an event where they put up taxes or cut taxes because it's not a technical fiscal event. But this is a massive, giant thing because it's going to set out all of the spending totals for each department all the way up to the financial year 2028, 2029. And when is that? Just before the next general election. So this has massive significance, really, 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 really big significance. And it's all getting quite crunchy behind closed doors.
Yes, and the closed doors opened a bit, didn't they? Because there was a leaked memo from Angela Rayner, deputy leader of the Labour Party, implying that she wants the Chancellor to tax more. Get your tax out, basically, is what the memo seems to be saying. Isn't it?
It did say that. And it also said things like take benefits from some migrants. And it said things like take child benefit away from some wealthier families, some more wealthy families. And these were Angela Rayner's ideas, allegedly, that she put to the Chancellor in the run-up to the spring statement. So it's from March, that memo that was leaked to the newspapers. But it was a very interesting sign and a sort of public revelation of a power play that's going on behind closed doors. Right. So what happens at the moment is that the Treasury, Rachel Reeves' deputy, Darren Jones, and Rachel Reeves herself are having conversations with all cabinet ministers about their budgets coming up. And we can talk a bit more about that in a minute because I've talked to about 20 people who are involved in this process in one way or another in the last couple of days. But therefore, anything that you see coming into the public domain about tensions here and tensions there should be considered in the context of what's actually going on in government at the moment. Are these really, really important discussions about who's getting money, for what are they getting money, where is the government going to set its priorities, not just for this year, but for next year, the year after, and the year that runs us into the general election.
So it would be normal for there to be a lot of briefing done behind the scenes, a lot of memos to be leaked. Even if this was a different stripe of government, this type of decision would get every department that spends money calling up their friends, calling up their party friends in the party, and maybe briefing journalists.
Possibly briefing journalists, and certainly journalists like me and you phoning up lots of people in government trying to say, OK, where are you at with the spending review?
Yes.
Where have you got to? What's the atmosphere? And we can talk about it in a minute, but one of the things that I'm really fascinated by is the real range of attitudes. So someone in government was saying to me yesterday, actually, there is quite a lot of fat, there's quite a lot of waste. Actually, it's been quite easy to find cuts. Another cabinet minister, genuinely, when I was speaking to them, genuinely sounded worried about how the services that they provide are going to withstand the kinds of savings that they might have to make the sums add up. So there's a huge range of sentiment about the decisions that are coming down the track.
So you keep saying, let's talk about it in a minute. And I know the reason why we're going to talk about it in a minute, because first we're going to listen to a voter or two.
Yeah, because this is the most important thing of all, right? Is what do people think of the decision that the government made this week to go back on that winter fuel policy announcement? And more broadly, what were voters, I think in Starmer's own constituency, saying to you today about how they're getting on?
So I went to a street market in his constituency, and people unbidden used the winter fuel phrase to me. They also don't think that a U-turn is a bad thing, but they do think it shows muddle. Now, that doesn't mean I spoke to everyone who voted for Keir Starmer, because I didn't.
That would have taken quite a long time.
But it's interesting. It was instructive to me, because you normally ask people a question and you don't expect them to come out with the phrase, I didn't like what they did on winter fuel, which is what one woman told me. Let's just listen to some of the voters in Keir Starmer's constituency.
7, 10, I'll get you another bag.
When a government does a U-turn, is that a sign of strength? They're listening to the people?
13,
No, I don't think he's got any choice but to do a U-turn because people are just not voting for him anymore.
What, cleaner?
Do you know what he stands for?
No, I'm not into politics really, you know. I'm just, whatever he's doing it wrong.
18.
Do you think he's a good man trying his best?
Yes, I do. Absolutely, I do. Absolutely. I think he's a very considerate, nice man who I have met in the past. And I believe he's doing his best.
I thought they were going to do so much. They were going to do this, they were going to do that. Now they blame the Conservative. Hey, for everything they blame the Conservative. Just do what you said, what you were going to do.
Because that thing about things can only get worse. You want it to be taken to the shining city on the hill, really, don't you, as a voter? You want optimism.
Are you sure you're Radio 4? Because that doesn't sound very Radio 4. That sounds more like Mormonism. No, I don't believe in the shining city on the hill.
I love hearing people's views. What did you say, by the way, if the man said that, are you a Mormon?
He said, in the bit we didn't play, he said he wanted more hope. And we've discussed this before on Newscast, and I said, take me to the shining city on the hill. I've said that many a time.
You have.
And he basically burst my balloon of pomposity.
Oh,
and
dear.
One of his customers, I said, he just called me a Mormon. And of course, you know, you're very welcome to be a Mormon, but I said, he just called me a Mormon. And the customer said, are you sure you're spelling that right?
Well, I was going to say, it's better than Elton John calling Peter Kyle a bit of a moron last week. Goodness me.
I think this being Newscast, we leave that in. Because if you do interrupt people in their life, you should expect, I think, that they can say anything they like.
100%.
So I'm glad we've played that. Basically, that's the flavour of it. And the lady at the end, she came from Italy in 1961. She was the one who said to me, I get it. I'm on pension credit, so I get my winter fuel, but I feel sorry for the other ones who lose out by £1 here and £1 there. She said that unbidden.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why, as a tiny little snapshot of actually why the government, in the end, decided they had to budge on this, because everybody knew about this, and voters, unprompted, would say how unhappy they were about it. And it's not very often there's a political decision that has almost universal cut-through. And when it's universal negative cut-through, politicians might be wise to change their mind, even though they might give them, you know, a couple of days of humiliation and an opportunity for their rivals to crow and say, we told you so.
So this takes you to your promised briefing
Yes.
on what's happening between MPs and your 20 people in government.
Yeah.
It seems to me that what I said, without bringing 20 people, is that if you've got a crunch decision on spending across all the big parts of our lives, you would fully expect there to be a lot of highly charged particles in politics. They all go like this, and they all don't want their bit cut. They want your bit cut.
Of course. And ministers will always want more for their department. Of course they will. And what's also going on here is a very tricky economic backdrop. So there is less money than ministers would want to have in the first place. And even in an era when a government was quite flush, ministers would still say, well, I want more for my trains or schools or potholes or whatever it is. So this is a very difficult backdrop for them. And when you hear ministers, as we will tomorrow, as you will again and again, newscasters in the next couple of weeks, you'll hear ministers say, well, there are tough choices to make. Well, there are difficult decisions to make. That's all code for saying some bits of government spending are going to be hacked back, right? So understand that first off. Second thing to understand is that Rachel Reeves already raised taxes by absolutely tons and tons in the autumn. And that is being spent already on a lot of extra money going into some bits of the public services. Third thing to realise is she already changed her old spending and borrowing rules. So she's got an extra over £100 billion of capital spending. So long-term cash for infrastructure, power, grids, transport, things like that. And that is going to be doled out at the spending review. So what does that mean? It means that the review is probably going to sound quite generous if you're somebody who wants to build a power station, or you're somebody who's bothered about rail and road and infrastructure. If you're somebody that has to worry about things like paying enough police people, or making sure there's enough money in the pot for paying social care workers at local authorities, for example, that day-to-day spending, then you might have a very, very hard time. So capital spending is probably going to sound pretty chunky and maybe impressive. Day-to-day spending, the kind of running costs of government departments, is going to feel very tight. And the two big winners, guess who? The NHS and defence. And the joke, that's doing the rounds in Whitehall is that after the spending review, the government's going to look like the NHS and the army with the rest of it bolted on.
Wow. Now, when I spoke to Carl Emerson of the Independent Number Crunchers, the IFS, he showed me the figures from the OBR, because you can't have enough three-letter acronyms on the BBC.
Especially not
So
the Office of Budget Responsibility.
So here we are on the BBC talking about the OBR through the lens of the IFS. And he showed me that before the pandemic and after the pandemic, claimants to personal independence payments, these help people who have disabilities pay for basic transport needs, and they're for people who are in work and outside work, money in the home, money to... Disability is expensive, basically. And, of course, it's many more things than that. But we're talking about it this way. Those claims doubled. So before Labour came in, those claims doubled. Not only did they double, they are projected to rise without any change to the eligibility. So that's the situation that Rachel Reeves did inherit. And we know there's a vote coming of which Labour MPs will have to take a view on what to do, if anything, about the eligibility for PIP.
And Labour, as a tribe, does not like taking money away from people who claim benefits. Philosophically, ideologically, it's not a party that wants to do that. And yet they find themselves with this enormous bill that is growing incredibly quickly. And they find themselves trying to shave that bill, not really cut it, but to stop it going up as fast as it has, but with a big political challenge on their hands. And one of the things we've seen really since Christmas, I think, is a real emergence of slightly more spiky groups of Labour MPs making their voices heard. Do you remember a couple of months ago we were talking about sort of the different tribes in the Labour Parliamentary Party? And essentially there weren't really that, there was nothing that was really going to cause Keir Starmer that much hassle beyond the sort of usual suspects on the left. And us being us, we'd come up with some kind of, what was it, like softies and newbies and something or other. Not an acronym, but a silly phrase.
You came up with them. One of them was toadies.
Yes, softies, newbies and toadies, and then the usual suspects. But these groups, and including a group that's campaigning on welfare, are now finding their voice, I think, in a more problematic way. And when you go to the spending review, one of the interesting things about it that connects really to this point is that Rachel Reeves' deputy, Darren Jones, has been spending some time, actually, in the last few weeks, regularly meeting the different regional groups of backbenchers, trying to sort of say to them, look, here are the kind of goodies that are going to be coming your way in your community. And I'm told that he wants to create stories, not just spreadsheets, which is an interesting thing because it acknowledges, actually, tacitly, that the top of government has not done enough to give backbenchers good things to go and tell people about in their own communities.
Yeah, because that links to delivery.
Right.
Which
your
is
favourite thing.
My favourite thing, which I've test-driven with Alan Johnson, the former Labour Home Secretary, who said to me on Radio 4, don't talk to me about delivery. I used to be a postman. So we know delivery is a big part of
But are you a pizza or a noodle man? That's because it just made me think when you said, I love delivery. And I just thought, well.
Yeah, so the government's got to deliver. It's got to be seen to deliver. It's had a very rocky start. And one of the things it's done is a deal. It's done a deal with the United States, it's done a deal with India, and it's done a deal with the EU.
And they did get their hat trick, which is what we talked about last weekend. They wanted to get their hat trick, their third deal. That was all being dressed up as a huge, big get-together in London on Monday. And the EU leaders did arrive. They did have their big moment. They did do a deal of sorts, as we expected, actually, and predicted last weekend. We were right about this, that there weren't final crunching details on some of the particular things like youth mobility. We said there'd be a deal in theory, but the details might not be there in practice. That is what happened. But, Labour obviously wants to concentrate on the things they feel they have achieved in the last couple of months. But there are restless animal spirits on the backbenches and inside government. And one of the things that I'll just stop quoting from the piece that's freely available to read on the BBC website, but one of the things that somebody in government said to me, look, is that we have to see from Rachel Reeves a Labour argument being made by a Labour Chancellor, because I'm paraphrasing a bit, but if it's all about cuts, then it could be any old political party just sitting there.
Yeah, they've got to put the red in the pencil. Never mind the lead in the pencil. So now we spoke to newscasters who are 18 by saying, please get in touch with us about what you think of the EU deal and how many of your friends are going to the left and the right. So we've had a big inbox on it. So thank you if you've responded. Alice is 19. Most voters my age are more easily persuaded by reform because they feel no sense of allegiance to the Conservatives or Labour. The Tories were in power for as long as my generation can remember. Brexit threw greater strain on what the politics was like, the polemic nature of things, and conflicts since Ukraine and Russia, Israel, Palestine, have strengthened our concerns as young people.
Very interesting. Tammy says, I'm not wholly surprised that many people my age are moving towards reform. Their populist views do appeal to more people than many think, but I think it's easier for them to make more ambitious claims because first past the post, our voting system, means they're very unlikely to become the government or the opposition. Thanks and love the show. Well, thank you, Tammy.
And we heard from Lauren, Phoebe, Thea as well, getting in touch. One of the 18-year-olds who wrote to us says, actually, the thing about reform is their clean skins. There is no track record really to judge them on. That's a great point, and I'm going to steal it.
Excellent.
So when it comes out of my mouth, I should pretend I never heard it from one of our 18-year-old newscasters.
I've always thought of you as a magpie.
I am an absolute magpie of good, well-said things. Matt is...
Steal something from an 18-year-old.
I can.
That's completely
You
unacceptable.
certainly can. That's allowed. It'll never be known now, but no one will ever know. Matt is an 18-year-old politics student. I'm a fan of Europe. I'm hoping to study international relations at uni. I would like a year abroad, hopefully in Europe. I think reform needs to realise youth mobility would be as beneficial to UK youth as Europeans. Thanks for the podcast.
And it's helped me a lot through A-levels.
Yes, I left that off.
Well, I think that's nice because I actually wanted to say, because I bumped into a very nice young newscaster today called Beatrice, who was doing exams, and I actually thought, wouldn't it be nice if we've got newscasters who are doing the hideousness of doing school or university exams if you're going through it? Good luck. We are rooting for you, and maybe if you're studying politics, maybe this might have helped you a tiny little fraction. I don't know.
Well, I think probably if it's written down, I'm going to take it as a win because I'm really chuffed that we got them. We haven't read them all, but it makes me think we probably need to fill a room with the younger newscasters and do a whole series like that way, because there is a big prize, it seems to me, for the political party that can persuade youngsters they're talking to them. And I've said this before in other years, because I'm not sure as a country we send a message to young people other than push off. It seems to be we're always moaning at them.
Speak for yourself.
Well, I think we're always moaning at them. We're always saying, oh, look at them all. They're always on the socials. They're awful. And the thing is, most adults are addicted to their phone. Most of the 50-year-olds I work with are never off their phone. And we're always saying, look at them, they're teenagers, they're always on their phones. And I think they're having a much harder time being teenagers than we had. We didn't have to compare our lives with other people via the social media about how they were going on holiday.
Correct.
I think there's a...
Well, we got to 27 minutes before you did an impersonation. That is a record. What are you doing tomorrow?
Well, we are playing our full street interviews.
Excellent. Other people being rude to Paddy on the radio?
Other
Tremendous.
people being, yep. We're going to speak to a couple of Labour MPs with different views. We're going to do the first nationalised railway system coming in tomorrow.
Yes,
Rail
Southwest
service. Yes.
Rail, Southwest Rail.
And that one of the first of the newly nationalised services will be a rail replacement bus. So we're going to be live to look at...
On the rail replacement bus?
Yeah.
Oh, blimey. Well, that is a smorgasbord of delight. On BBC One, we are speaking to Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, who will be fascinating this week with all these politics swirling around, and how will she answer the claims of this leaked memo and all those sorts of things. I suspect she'll probably try to not answer it at all. But anyway, she'll be with us live, as will the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch. And also this morning, I went and met Imelda Staunton, which was fun, with her daughter. So that was very nice. I know, a Dame, Angela and Kemi. What more could you possibly want?
It sounds absolutely like I'll have to tune in at 9. If only
have it on in this
only I
studio.
wasn't busy. Yes, you're always on, but the volume's down.
A lot of people like it that way.
But I look at it and I think that's terribly interesting. It's very, very interesting. Now, look, enough of this. We look forward to your scoops tomorrow.
We'll see. But we will join once more with you newscasters tomorrow for Sunday's newscast. But thank you very much for joining us on Saturdays.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.